Dr. Neil Hannon, a psychiatrist in British Columbia, Canada. I am a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at the University of British Columbia and a board member of the Ketamine Assisted Therapy Association of Canada. I use ketamine assisted therapy in my practice of psychiatry and have seen the impressive therapeutic effects that it has had on patients with treatment-resistant depression. Ketamine with psychotherapy can be used as a tool to allow a person to experience their thoughts and feelings in a novel, beneficial way. Psychotherapy with ketamine works synergistically together, much more powerfully than ketamine or psychotherapy alone. Ketamine-assisted psychotherapy can be a life-saving treatment for people with treatment-resistant depression. It needs to be available outside of hospitals, in clinics, in order for patients to have greater access to this treatment. We hope you will join us in our efforts to ensure that this treatment becomes readily accessible to everyone who needs it. Thank you very much.
Welcome to the first annual World Psychedelics Day. My name is Shelby Hartman. I'm the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Double Blind. It's a print magazine and education platform covering all things pertaining to psychedelics. And I am pleased to be your host for the discussion today about mushrooms and if they can heal us and the world. It's my great pleasure to introduce our guests for today's discussion. Dr. Rosalind Watts is the former clinical lead of the psilocybin for depression study at Imperial College London. She is now based at the Synthesis Institute, a legal psychedelic retreat, which is based out of Amsterdam. And Paul Stamets, who is a world-renowned mycologist and also well-known speaker, author, medical researcher, and entrepreneur. Thank you for joining us for the launch of World Psychedelics Day, Roz and Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about psychedelic mushrooms, what we know about them, what they can do for us and for the planet. And so the first question that I want to put out to you both is, why is there suddenly so much interest in mushrooms? What's going on?
It's mushrooming.
Go ahead, Rosalind.
It's mushrooming. It's kind of, it's fascinating to observe it. It's almost difficult when you're working within the field and you've been kind of surrounded by mushrooms or psilocybin-based kind of things for a long time. It's almost hard to get a perspective of how much it is changing in the mainstream, but I do get that sense that things are really shifting now. I don't know about you, Paul. Do you feel the sea change happen?
Well, I've never seen something this on this scale. We're in a mushroom renaissance that's sweeping the entire planet. When I first, I've been involved in this scene since the mid 1970s, and I would go to conferences. I was a long-haired, hippie-looking guy, and I was passionate about taxonomy in the genus Psilocybe, and doing lots of scanning electron microscopy. And even though I had sincere interest, it was like I had leprosy or something. I get into a conference and there'd be this sort of force field of isolation of people distancing themselves from me. That even carried all the way to my first TED talk, where they asked me, "Don't you dare talk about psilocybin mushrooms." And now they want to be on front stage at TED. So there is a sea change. But moreover, there has been these renaissance movements on psychedelics and psilocybin over millennia. But this is a disruptive change and expansion of consciousness that I think fundamentally threatens the foundation of orthodox religions, of control of people, using religious privilege, suppressing indigenous knowledge, and even in Europe, their Germanic traditions. There is the Bavarian Beer Purity Act of 1516 that was passed specifically banning mushrooms in beer. And then you look at the fermentation of magic mushrooms in honey for making mead. And since mushrooms are so perishable, indigenous peoples in Europe and in the Americas preserved psilocybin mushrooms in honey. And by doing so, would ferment and create a psychoactive beverage of sorts, or honey, or mead. So I think this speaks to the universality of use of psilocybin mushrooms around the world. And there is now a consciousness uprising. And we literally stand on the shoulders of giants, Maria Sabina, Valentina Wasson, who does not get enough credit. These are the pioneers, and and I just salute the courageousness of all those people that preceded us, because so many of them were victimized by authorities and suppressed, including Maria Sabina. So I think our time has come for a massive expansion in our consciousness and understanding the interconnectivity that we all share.
Do you think?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Chime in.
Just going to say, it's really interesting, actually, Paul, that you bring in the indigenous use and Maria Sabina and Valentina. And yes, I mean, there is such a kind of hype at the moment around psilocybin clinical research, but it does feel to me like we're really at a point where recognizing the long-standing traditions, learning more about the Mazatec ways of using mushrooms is so important now, that we start to kind of weave those strands together. Because it feels to me like with ayahuasca, when the kind of the heritage, the cultural heritage, the context never got detached from the plant, from the tradition, because it stayed as a plant. But because with our clinical research we use synthesized psilocybin, it feels like the cultural history, the indigenous use, the traditions have got cut off. It's almost like we've got cut off at the roots. And so in the Western psilocybin tradition, we're really quite far away from the long-standing, centuries-old ways of knowing and doing with it. So it feels to me now super important to have conversation and dialogue between, the psilocybin research and the ancient ways of working with the plants, or the fungi, I should say.
We only know about the history of psilocybin use through the art and through the folkloric language, the folkloric history of being passed down. So with the Mazatecs, they did not use psilocybe cubensis. They use psilocybe azoticorum. Okay, how many psychonauts out there today are using psilocybe azoticorum? Well, very, very few. How many using psilocybe cubensis? Well, 99% plus are using that. And it's circumpolar. It grows in the subtropics around the world, from India to Texas, and it may have originated from an island off of Africa. We're involved in genomic history of tracking the evolution of psilocybes and where their origins are likely have come from. And so then the cool thing about psilocybin mushrooms, 116 known psilocybin active species. So it's just not one. So yes, the Mazatec tradition is a fantastic tradition that has informed us, has trained us, and it's been popularized because of R. Gordon Wasson's, you can't use the word discovery. And I don't want to use the word exploitation, but it's somewhere in between those two. Amplified Maria Sabina's message, but the Mazatecs, from the people that I know who are deeply involved with them, want this knowledge to be shared. It is a healing force, and to recognize the unanimity of being. All human beings need to be healed. So, blessings and honor to the Mazatecs for carrying that high level message forward. But I don't think the use of psilocybe cubensis at all trespasses on the Mazatec tradition. It's been used throughout the world, but we only know about its use in the past, literally, as I said, through art, through pictographs, through the conquistadors had a priest named Sahagún who recorded these in the 1500s, the use of these. So we only know about the use by indigenous peoples if there's evidence in the historical record to show that. But we do know that psilocybin mushrooms have been used by cultures all over the world from the tiny glimpses that we've had. So I see this as a bridge culturally, ecologically. I don't see the mushrooms as a source of division, but a source of unification. And it brings all people together in the oneness of being. So I think this is a beautiful thing.
A big focus of World Psychedelics today is to talk about not only how psychedelics heal ourselves, but their potential to heal our relationship with other people and to the planet, to think about these big questions around interconnectivity. So, given your work, Roz, administering psilocybin in clinical contexts, what are your thoughts around how we bring the sacred back into sort of psychedelic medicine?
That's such an interesting question. So you mean kind of how do we bring the connection to the sacred into the protocols, into the specified models kind of thing?
Right, exactly. I mean, Paul was talking about this bridge, right? The bridge between the centuries-old use of psilocybin species in different contexts in Maria Sabina and the indigenous use of psilocybin. I can't remember the name of that species that he said, and then of course the synthetic psilocybin that's being administered at places like Imperial College London. And it's a beautiful idea. But when we start thinking about the practicalities of this bridge, I mean, what does that look like? Have you thought about it?
Well, what's really fascinating to me is, in a way, that without that it seems that connectedness is really a core part of the experience for most people with depression for whom psilocybin is, I guess, effective. It doesn't seem to work for everybody. It doesn't seem to have a profound effect on everyone, but for all of those that it does affect, which is most people in our studies, it seems that connectedness is a key part of their experience. And that might be connection to self, to others, to nature, and sometimes connection to a spiritual principle as well. But that, in a way, I don't think the framing needs to be specifically around encouraging a connection to the divine, because if that's the kind of connectedness that person needs, it will happen naturally. I think, in a way, that the container of the setting, there probably could be more space for the sacred, but there are also, especially in the UK where we're doing this research, a lot of the participants that we work with really like the kind of the neutrality in the space and the therapeutic care and concern, but that it wasn't really directive in any direction. Although, I have to say, it was probably most directive in the direction of nature connection. The setting of the room, we put pictures of a forest around the walls. So, obviously it would have been best to do it actually in a forest, but as we couldn't do that, we tried to recreate the feeling of being in a forest. And I feel like, for me, having, the end of those 2 psilocybin for depression studies, for me, I feel like a real sense of the importance of helping the container to become as nature-based as possible for the outcomes for the participants, but also because psychedelics are amplifiers. They work in different settings in different ways, and the way you the framing you provide will often dictate the kind of outcome they have. And it feels to me that if we they've been used for thousands of years in nature, and that if we can consciously start to create a setting that really prioritizes nature, and that we are nature, our place in nature, specifically in the preparation and the integration, that it would not only be good for therapeutic outcomes, but it's essential at this moment in time. Because sometimes I get frustrated when I kind of reading like mental health research or clinical studies talking about therapeutic aims that don't mention the crisis that we're in, which means that all of those things are kind of irrelevant, So if we don't have if we're extinct, then none of those things matter. So it feels like now is the time to really consciously bring in nature activism, nature protection, nature connectedness into our therapeutic protocols.
I agree, but I want to underscore a fundamental difference here. We're looking at each other on a 2-dimensional screen. Okay, Rosalind and Shelby, if I were talking to you right now in person, you'd be 3-dimensional. Well, the same thing. The background I'm in a remote island in British Columbia. That's actually where I am, on my land there. And you could be in a clinical setting in a hospital environment with clinicians and nurses and medical support people with a picture of a forest. Or you could sit out on a bluff with the expansiousness of nature, with seeing into the cosmos and the stars and the sky unfolding, the dance of clouds, there's this, as most of you know, there's this tone of nature, this when you're outside and you have this experience, you are getting all these signals coming from the natural environment, which you're not going to get in a hospital setting. A hospital setting is very narrow guardrails. That's very important for the clinical studies, but they're just substantiating, I think, a small portion of the experiential benefits that you get being outside in nature. So I applaud the clinical studies, but the idea of using one molecule in a clinically setting hospital with a picture of a forest is so much different than taking the natural form and being in contact with nature. Direct biomolecular communication with the exigency of nature, the gestalt of what you're joining together. I think that is a profoundly deeper experience, and in terms of nature relatedness, I think it's on a whole order of magnitude more important, more significant in terms of its personal impact, from my experience. So, anyhow, that's I like tripping in nature. Okay, that's where I come from. That's how I've been most informed, you might say, spiritually informed, intellectually and cognitively informed, is being in nature.
I was going to say anyone who's tripped in a forest or in the desert probably would not disagree with you, but unfortunately, we're up against all these. I mean, I don't know what the protocols are called in the UK, but in the US with the FDA, and you can't have too many variables, because then you don't know what the heck is doing the healing. So Roz, what was your experience when you put pictures of the forest all around the clinical room? I mean, did people report that they felt more connected to nature? And I mean, what were, what did people,
Well, in the first study we did, where the room didn't have any kind of nature elements, it was a room with kind of blue lights, and people still, without any kind of nature motifs, they still had these internal experiences of connecting to nature. Some amazing, I did some qualitative research on their experiences, that first study, and some really, the quotes that probably really have shaped my direction now are from that early study, with people saying things like, I used to see nature as a thing, like a TV or a painting, and now I know that I am it. Nature is me. I am nature. I mean, that kind of really captures it, I think. So people without any kind of direction towards nature or any nature setting in the room, people still had this powerful experience. And we did have a rose in the room, like a real rose. And so one participant, I gave him the rose to look at, and he's looking at the petals, breathing and making this deep connection with this flower. So in the second study, where we had the pictures of the trees, I mean, it was just kind of going up one level from that, trying to bring in a little bit more. And I think quite a few people had profound experiences with trees in their journeys. And I think the work I'm doing now is really using the idea of the tree. I think trees have a lot to teach us. So, yeah.
How important do we think that having a connection to nature is for mental health?
Oh my goodness. Talked to all the people living in cities during COVID. There is a global pandemic of depression because of not being in contact with nature. Ironically, the good news is I go to the old growth forest a lot and the national parks in the United States. And I've never seen, and they've never seen, so many people in the national parks during COVID. They can't go to other places, so the national parks are booked. It's good. People are getting out in nature. They're rediscovering nature. But I go into the old growth forest, and Dr. Pam and I, go hiking, and it's amazing how few people we have. There's been a drop off in the number of people going to the national parks and exploring, like hiking. It's really interesting because when I hike deep into the Cascades or the Olympics, who do I mostly encounter? Germans and Austrians, people from Central Europe who have these. They say, you have no idea how important these mountains are. You have so many of them, but I've seen a drop off of Americans in particular going to the forests until COVID, and now there's this return to nature movement. So there's always interesting benefits when you have something that's so disruptive to society that changes people's behavior. And I just segueing here, I told Michael Pollan that mushrooms fundamentally changed my mind. That became the title of his book. So, but I think they do. I think psilocybin mushrooms do change your mind. And speaking of, they rewire your neurological pathways. You know, nature rewards that which is good. We're incentivized by the benefits, I think, of positive feedback. And psilocybin mushrooms give you a positive feedback that reinforces that this path is a better path than the path that gives you negative feedback. Don't you think? So it seems to me that this is incentivizing us, and this is a paradigm shift. And I want to state, I absolutely believe this. We are not the same Homo sapiens of 200,000 years ago. This is time for a paradigm shift in the evolution of a new species of human. So with the crisis of the pandemic and with the renaissance of psilocybin, it are two pistons in the engine for an explosive, I think, evolution of the human species into a new species, a new form of Homo sapiens. I like to call it Homo excellus or something. But this is our time. This is our time to fundamentally, epigenetically, which means that the environment influences the genes that you express. Well, if we can bring more of the ecosystem awareness back into our daily lives, then the nature relatedness phenomenon with psilocybin, again, builds a stronger connection. And I think there will be better Earth citizens taking care of the ecosystems that we love and the ecosystems that love us than living in a capsule industrialized city in the middle of a, mass, and with millions of people all in little boxes staring at TV screens. How many people would like to be where I am now? I think the majority of people would see that background and go, oh my gosh. And I'm living my dream because my path has led me here. And it's because the psilocybin mushrooms have, changed my mind and awakened me to the importance of ecosystems and ecosystem health. That was all.
Roz, why do you think it is so important at this particular time in history that people are awakening to their connection to nature through therapeutic modalities like psilocybin?
Well, I think as Paul was saying, that we're kind of like most of us are in these little boxes with our televisions and our screens, and we're synchronized to a kind of artificial rhythm. We're synchronized to this very fast, artificial kind of consumer modern rhythm, which is destroying us. And if we synchronize back, we remember that we are nature, as this participant in their first study said, we are nature, then we can synchronize with the rhythms of nature, the patterns of nature, and the cycles of nature. And I think that's what we desperately need, because, I mean, when you think about the way nature works, it works in seasons, light and dark, spring, summer, autumn, winter. There are these cycles of decay and renewal. Yet in our modern culture, especially, kind of Western culture, there's this idea that it should always be summer, or it should always be go, 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 busy, busy. We really avoid and deny the dark half of the year. And that is terrible for us. We the darker parts of ourselves get split off. We can't face them or talk about them. So I think really synchronizing with this idea of what nature teaches us, the rhythms of nature, the cycles of nature, if we can really resonate with that and learn from nature and take our place in it, then not only can we protect nature, but actually we can be healed by that, by becoming in tune with those rhythms and those patterns. And I think that's what Paul is talking about partly as well, when he says about when you're in nature, you hear that kind of the hum, the thrum, that force of nature. And there's just something about that when we become resonant with that incredible force, that life force, that energy that is inherently healing. But also I've seen with people with depression that it's incredibly difficult for them to align with that energy, to open up to nature, because when depression is so bad that people just feel trapped in their mind, they really struggle. We had one participant in the first study who had terrible depression. He was a farmer and he lived in the most beautiful, beautiful part of Scotland. And yet he was in his bedroom all day, every day, because his depression was so bad he couldn't go outside. And then he had a psilocybin experience. And his family said, he's back with us outside. He went for walks. He enjoyed the land. He felt alive. And then his depression came back a few months later, and he said, you know, I'd rather be in a locked room with no windows and doors than in this beautiful forest, because I can't feel the beauty of it. And in fact, it just makes me feel worse because I used to be able to feel the beauty of it and now I can't. So I don't think that we need tools to help us connect to nature, help us open up, because so many of us are depressed. And like Paul said, you know, after COVID as well, so many people are anxious and depressed. Most of us need help with really opening up to nature and allowing ourselves to be synchronized with its rhythms, because otherwise we're just too trapped in our heads to be able to open up to it.
Thank you. That was a beautiful answer. I'm going to pivot a little bit as we're talking about the importance of preservation of the planet. I want to ask Paul about his work on saving the bees from the pandemic of colony collapse, because that work has gained a lot of attention. Can you tell us about that? And also, because we're talking about mushrooms today, might you also be able to address if mushrooms are a part of that work?
Well, this is a great subject, and I think it's a good example of a Venn diagram of the intersection of scientists who live in different silos. But how many beekeepers grow mushrooms? I was growing mushrooms in my garden in the 1980s, the garden giant. And one morning I came out and I had 2 beehives. And one morning I came out and I saw bees all over my wood chips of my garden giant mushroom bed. And they moved the wood chips, and I looked really closely, and there's about 30 or 40 bees. And then for 40 days, a continuous convoy of bees from my beehives to my mushroom patch. And it was sipping on these little droplets. And I thought it was sipping for sugars. And it literally shrunk the bed just because it was milking it in a sense. So I published this, and in one of my books, sorry, I have to adjust my headset here, and in Harrowsmith magazine in 1988. And then in 1994, I forgot about it. So a friend of mine, Louis Schwarzberg, was doing a movie on pollination. He's the person who's behind Fantastic Fungi, the movie. He told me about I had heard about colony collapse, of course, and he said it's really getting bad. He's been talking to experts, and then I started connecting the dots, and I have these waking dreams, and I was involved with the BioShield Biodefense Department after 9/11. You can Google Stamets, smallpox, National Public Radio, a vetted press release by DOD. And some of these polypore mushrooms were in the top 10 of all samples, more than 2 million samples tested by the Department of Defense against viruses. So the only natural product, and the top 10 of more than 2 million. So these polypore mushrooms showed regulation of immunity that consequently allowed the virus to push down the titer levels of the viruses within the cells. But that was an in vitro study. So when I had this sort of like, oh my gosh, maybe these polypore mushrooms could help bees survive the viruses that mites are vectoring. 1984, I think mites came to the United States. Now the mites are like dirty hypodermic syringes. It's like having a pancake on your back if you were a bee. That's how big they are. And they inject these viruses. Now these viruses have spread all over the world, the deformed wing virus in particular. Other virologists I've talked to, entomologists that specialize in viruses that infect insects, have said that they haven't seen a virus-free bee in more than 10 years. So I applied that, and I had this epiphany. And I remember calling up the University of California, Davis, and I talked to the head entomologist. And I said, I have a breakthrough possible idea about saving the bees. I had this waking dream. And what you never talk to another scientist about having a dream. It's like, later, I'll see you later, dude. So I called up Washington State University. I kind of recalibrated my rap a little bit. And that developed a wonderful relationship with Dr. Steve Shepard and the Washington State University pollination force there, the scientists. Quickly forward, we published in Nature. We reduced viruses, these extracts from these polypore mushrooms in the sugar water of honeybees, reduced one virus 45,000 to 1 with one treatment, 10 days. The deformed wing virus, almost 1,000 to 1. Bees used to fly for about 10 days, and now they fly for about 4 days because of all these stressors, pesticides, loss of habitat. The mites are by far the biggest one. And so by reducing the viruses in bees, the bees now live longer. So our publication in Nature is still in the top 1% of all articles ever published in the Nature publication ecosystem. Now that's phenomenal. And the reason why, it's a natural product. This is not an in vitro test like with the BioShield program. This is an in vivo test. This is an animal clinical study. So we don't know the mode of action. We know that genes are being upregulated, but this is where scientists can get lost in the weeds. They literally can't see the forest for the trees, is that the end result is beneficial. So now we have found that we can nearly double the lifespan of bees, and the bees benefit better than their own natural honey. This is a natural product that speaks to the complexity of nature. So in the pharmacopoeia of mushrooms in the ecosystem, our ancestors, trial and error, all over the world, indigenous peoples tried which different mushrooms. We only know what mushrooms are edible or poisonous from the experiences of people who've eaten them before us, right? That's literally how we know. That's how we know what frogs are edible too. Some frogs are poisonous, some frogs are edible. Some plants, the same thing. So from that massive potential library of species, our ancestors narrowed it down to about 200 species and about 40 or 50 in particular that meshes with our microbiome, that has the right biochemistry. I think psilocybin mushrooms are the same. And so, Roz, what I'd like you to really consider, being a clinician and being well connected, is still to this date, there has not been a parallel clinical study of psilocybin mushrooms standardized the same amount of psilocybin and or psilocin versus the pure molecule. It's either going to be less, equal, or more, right? That's the three possible outcomes. Now, this is not an exaggeration, but for effect, 99.99999999999% of the people in the world are taking psilocybin mushrooms. That other small percentage is pure psilocybin. It is the government's duty to protect the health of the public and to also reflect the trends of the public use. So where is that clinical study? Why don't we have it? I think the entourage effect of these psilocybin mushrooms, and the reason why our article in Nature is so popular and so sought after, is because we show a natural product is more powerful than a pure pharmaceutical. In fact, there are no pharmaceuticals that reduce viruses in bees. So the fact that we can, if you had AIDS, if you had COVID, and you had a 45,001 reduction in your viral titers in 10 days, well, any clinician, any physician, any patient would say that's a win. So this speaks to the complexity of nature as a library of remedies and medicines that if we can standardize and control the quality issues, then I think the benefits is going to be similar to what we see with the bees, is that the receptor fields are going to have there's a lot of crosstalk between the molecules that are involved. And looking at one receptor, one molecule, one result is very narrow vision, I think, of the potential benefits when you look at the complexity and the benefits of the entourage effect of psilocybin mushrooms versus psilocybin as a pure molecule.
I so completely agree with you, especially because I've heard anecdotal reports of people saying that you mentioned before about the different kinds of mushrooms, and that Maria Sabina didn't use the cubensis. She used I can't remember the name of the one that you said.
Psilocybe azotiocorum.
Psilocybe azotiocorum. But I know I've heard, anecdotal reports of people saying that various different types of
I'm sorry, it's zapatocorum. There's another mushroom called azotiocorum. She used psilocybe zapatocorum. Okay, thank you.
It's very poetic and beautiful. I love the names. But I've heard people talk about, so there's one kind of mushroom, I think it's the azuricens mushroom is the strongest. And its effects, I think I'm speaking completely out of my lane here, but is it biotin that's also biotin?
The baeocystin, norbaeocystin, and norpsilocin. And we're very deep in the analog research and showing neurogenesis. And we found that norbaeocystin and norpsilocin are extremely progenitor in being able to stimulate neurite outgrowth in vitro with human pluripotent stem cells. And we have now repeated these experiments multiple times. These are legal analogs. And so there is very strong evidence that the stacking of these analogs together give you a much more profound effect than any one analog by itself. So we have several papers that are in development right now, and these will soon be published. And so we definitely are seeing benefits from the psilocybin analogs which are legal, by the way. Baeocystin, norbaeocystin, norpsilocin are all legal molecules. Psilocybin and psilocin are not. Psilocybin, of course, is a prodrug to psilocin. So psilocin is what actually activates your receptors. So this is why I think the entourage effect and the evidence that we are collecting, I think, is going to take people by surprise, because we have something that I think is a fundamental breakthrough discovery that the world will soon be knowing about.
Do you think, I wonder whether in Oregon, this kind of research will be more possible, because the barrier we keep coming up against in clinical research, for example, in the UK, is that we can't get any ethical approval to study anything other than GMP grade synthetic psilocybin, because they know exactly how much is in it and it's completely, pure and quantifiable. So you can't get ethical approval for doing it with actual mushrooms. Do you think Oregon...
Yeah, on Thursday, I'm in a public meeting with the Oregon Quality Control for psilocybin for therapeutic use. I speak in front of the Attorney General and the public and a bunch of physicians. So one of my favorite quotes from Voltaire is, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." Do you really have to go to a molecule? Good luck on finding a molecule that reduces viruses against bees when I can do a natural extract and get 45,000 to 1 reduction in viruses. Okay, what drug's going to beat that? Good luck to you. And then meanwhile, we'll save the bees and you can figure that out later. Well, I think very similarly, what's happening in Oregon and the struggle will be the states' rights versus the federal rights, the federal law. Now, there are some exemptions already. The banking system, for instance, now is allowing federally funded banks can accept, marijuana revenue within the states. That was a long path in order to get that, allowed. And hopefully the federal government will reflect states' rights. But now it is a movement. In Washington, D.C., 76% of the voters voted for the decriminalization of psychedelics. Politicians, you should wake up and listen to the people. Don't you think? This is a sweeping wave across the world. And so we have so many states. New York State, California now has a bill, Oregon, Washington State. It's sweeping. So this is a paradigm shift. The government needs to get ahead of this, recognizing that this is a trend, and the voting of the people, the government's supposed to reflect the will of the people. So the increasing popularity, because psilocybin mushrooms reduce crime. You only have to do them once or twice a year. They're not addictive. They're anti-addictive compounds. They make people more peaceful, friendlier. They reduce crime. There's so many societal benefits. The return on investment, just in terms of the revenue savings within the law enforcement and the legal community, and I see like a pebble in a pond, an epiphany changing, like your patient in Scotland, him coming out of his room and then being related to nature, that had a pebble in a pond effect of goodwill and goodness, and a story that you're telling today that conveys wisdom and knowledge. And so that's what we can do. Now, the adverse of that is criminal behavior. People do something. It's not only the victim that is victimized, it's the family of the victim, it's the family of the perpetrator, it's their neighbors. People then are on edge or hostile, they're turmoiled inside. It also is immunodepressing. So when you have crime, you have people who are depressed, severely challenged mentally, their immune system downregulates, they're more open now to infections and not being able to fight cancer, whereas we know there's a direct correlation to happiness and emotion for even the placebo effect. So placebo enhanced activity can actually help immunological responses. So this also has been well established. So I think the pebble in the pond, the psilocybin pebble in the pond of consciousness, then emanates out something that can be paradigm shifting and ultimately reduce crime and save revenue, in case the government is listening.
I think you're preaching to the choir. And I just, I think that we're kind of touching on a larger theme here, which is, on the one hand, we have how people use these compounds, these plants, these fungi, and have for thousands of years in ceremonial and other contexts. And then on the other hand, we have really what we're up against as we try and get these drugs through different regulatory agencies to get to market. And, they want to be able to measure exactly how much psilocybin there is in every dose. And they want to be able to do it in a clinical context because they don't want too many variables flying around. And we've got the whole, ethical debate as well around, what does it mean for for-profit drug development companies to come into this space and to try and patent certain molecules. And, there's just a lot to discuss, a lot going on here between, ideally what we would like to see and the practicalities of getting these things researched and legalized. So that's something I'd really like to kind of put to you, Roz, is, have you thought about, what steps might need to be taken to research the whole mushroom or to do, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy in nature? Like, what, is there a way to do all this stuff that we want to do?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what I think about all the time. That's what I'm usually thinking about. If I'm not thinking of something else, it's like, how? But I think the reality is that there are lots and lots of retreats offering psychedelic ceremonies in communities, in nature already, in places where it's legal. So I think one of the things I really, really hope will happen, and I don't know if, there may be people out there that are thinking along similar lines, or maybe it's something where some of us will join together to develop this, but there are two steps that I think are going to be really important. So there are clinical studies, and they have, even the big clinical studies, they still have very small sample sizes. Like our last study was 60 people, or actually 59. It's very small. Hundreds and thousands of people are going to psychedelic retreats all the time. And actually, people go that are suffering from depression. Lots of retreats do see people that have depression and anxiety and all sorts of other things, and addiction. So I think what would be wonderful is if we could really support the retreat centers to work together to study the outcomes. So the two things I think we need, the first thing is, let's say we decided on like 5 outcome measures and all the retreat centers kind of came together, because I think in the face of this kind of corporatization of the synthetic psilocybin, we're going to need all the retreat centers in these different communities to really work together, because together we're big, we're powerful together. So, and I guess we have maybe a different vision of the ecosystem we'd like to see, whereas maybe kind of synthetic psilocybin is more about a kind of monoculture. We want diversity, different ways of doing this, working together, but in our own different ways. So I think that one of the things we can do as a diverse ecosystem of different providers is work together to decide on like 5 outcome measures and say, right, these are it would be difficult to come to consensus, but we could try. There's one on depression, there's one on nature connectedness, there's like a safety one, and then something else, a few more. And that all the different retreat centers would just, give those measures to people, fill in the questionnaire before you come and after you come, and then again after 6 months. I'm sure people wouldn't mind doing it. And then we'd have these huge data sets. Yes, it's naturalistic. Yes, it's not placebo controlled, but it would be such a large sample size. It would be really compelling. And the second thing I think we need to do alongside that, maybe in the same platform, is sharing experiences of when things don't quite go to plan, or where things are a little bit scary, because it's really intense work. And I know that in our team, we had many, many times where we felt like, this is intense. We're kind of, we don't really have a map for this. We don't, especially like Western academic clinician types, we don't have a lineage, a heritage. We haven't been taught by our family line how to work with these tools. We're kind of coming to it fresh. We don't have deep roots. So it's like, how can we share with each other really openly when things happen that don't feel quite comfortable, or we think we could have done things differently? So I think if we had some platform for sharing outcome measures and sharing near misses, the whole of the retreat ecosystem would become stronger, safer, and our research output would be very impressive. And of course, we'd be researching mushrooms and truffles and plants rather than any synthetic molecules.
Well, we actually have that platform now. Did you know about microdose.me?
No.
Microdose.me. I popularized it on the Joe Rogan show. And it has about 20 different outcomes. We have now more than 13,000 subscribers. It's only for the iOS platform. We have depression and anxiety, we have vision, we have sight. And we have such a large subscriber base that just what you're speaking about, Roz, having a clinical study, how do you see signal from the noise? If you only have 10, 20 people, you might have something that's effective that's clouded because of the ambiguity factors and the confounders. But our microdose.me study, and we submitted a paper to Nature's under peer review right now, and we have a vertical. Now, for depression and anxiety and mood, fantastic results. But the counter could be that, or it could be a placebo. I'm microdosing, you're microdosing, we're all microdosing together. Aren't we happy? Yeah, we're part of a community, we're doing something. So that's a legitimate pushback, but you can't have a real medicine effects that's placebo enhanced. And so that's a possibility as well. So the microdosing basically is subsensorium. It's equivalent to about 1 milligram of psilocybin or 1/10 of a gram of psilocybe cubensis at 1% psilocybin content, generally speaking. But the microdosing schedule is with taking it, how many times per week, 0.1 grams to 0.5 grams of psilocybin. And the microdose.me study that we have just, unveiled, and I can publicly talk about this now, but Dr. Pam Crisco and I were talking and go, we have to get something away from that subjective. How do you feel? Okay, that's a really subjective thing. The placebo enhancement effect is hard to disambiguate between the real effect versus the placebo effect. Placebos can be very helpful for conventional medicine. You're taking a cancer drug, it's got a good outcome, you're positive about it, so the drug actually works better. So we've focused in on the TAP test. The TAP test is a test that is used in Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury. Many people in the audience have taken this. It's either how many times you can click your thumb and your finger together, or how many times you can do alternated taps. And when you're 20 or 30 years of age, of course, you wouldn't see neurological decline when you're at the peak of your neurological health. So because we had such a large data set, our team focused in on the 55-year-old pluses. And we found something phenomenal. And I'll be glad to splice this in as an image, and the editing here. But we found that the 55 plus year olds, when they stacked with lion's mane and niacin and microdosing of psilocybin mushroom, psilocybe cubensis, the TAP test for 55 plus year olds was staying around 40 or so in 1 minute, and it skyrocketed to 75 after 1 month. That is not a placebo. You cannot explain that with a placebo. That's a neurophysiological benefit from a natural product at basically at 1 milligram. So I suggest to all you clinicians, and even Robin Carhart Harris, great researcher, fundamentally flawed assumption that 1 milligram of psilocybin is a placebo. It is if you take 30 milligrams over a month versus 30 milligrams in one night, you have the big heroic experience, but you titrate this as a microdose, we are seeing neurophysiological benefits that cannot be explained by a placebo. And moreover, when microdosing with just psilocybin without the niacin and lion's mane had a modest increase in the TAP test, p-value is 0.04, whereas the p-value with the stack of lion's mane, niacin, nicotinic acid, and psilocybin mushrooms was 0.001. So significant, highly significant, because we had a large enough elderly population, and neurodegeneration is age related, whether it's Alzheimer's or just general dementia due to age. So you can't explain this away as a subjective result. So I think this opens up a whole new door in medicine. That psilocybin mushrooms, and the question is, was it psilocybin? Was it norabiocysteine, norpsilocin, all of them together? I think that we have a game-changing breakthrough showing that microdosing improves neurophysiology in age, because it's a self-reporting epidemiological study in a sense, showing that there's clear benefit. And these were all masked, there's no way of cooking the books on this. And 3 statistical analyses went after the data sets trying to disprove it and could not. The data came out solid. So that's our next paper that we're submitting, showing that microdosing gives neurophysiological benefit as demonstrated by the TAP test, which is cannot be explained by placebos because there's a neurological benefit we can build new neurons. So we're very excited to talk about that. My motto is question authority, question all assumptions, do so with respect and humor. You get a lot more mileage than going up against people. But the orthodox approach is contraindicated by the psilocybin mushroom experience. I mean, this whole thing of my way, the highway, this is the way it is. That's what mushrooms are about. Mushrooms are about the expansiveness of knowledge. And I think this speaks to that. So we're real excited to have this next paper published. And I think it's a game changer. Microdosing works. Now we need to prove it clinically between psilocybin versus psilocybin mushrooms, microdosing. That's what we really want Johns Hopkins to do and other research organizations we're affiliating with. So I put the call out there. We're looking for clinicians to conduct these clinical studies, and we have a good protocol in development.
Paul, does it work? So psilocybin illegal in the UK. Does it work if you do lion's mane and niacin? Would it still? What would be the effect then if you take
that? That's a great question. And the next set of data, we're looking at that because about half the people in the microdose.me subscription population were not taking any psilocybin, any LSD. There was a big surprise to us. They were just measuring themselves. So we had a non-drug use population. So that's a really good question because what's the effect of niacin and lion's mane? But we did get liftoff of psilocybin use only without lion's mane and niacin. So we already approved that psilocybin microdosing increases frequency of the TAP test. It's just massively enhanced. So by subtraction, you take out lion's mane and niacin, and it is a cumulatively added effect. What we don't know what the individual effect contribution of lion's mane by itself or niacin by itself. I mean, we end up with, I think, 6 arms in that study if we can do all the comparisons. But this is something that don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you got something that works, that's clearly beneficial. Do you want to wait 5 or 10 years until the FDA approves something that could benefit your father or mother right now who are suffering from pre-Alzheimer's symptoms? I mean, everyone, including the government regulators, are getting older. They have a vested interest, and I think we need to protect the body, intellect of our culture, because these elders need to pass on knowledge to younger generations. And the loss of every elder is a loss of an encyclopedic knowledge that could be paradigm shifting if they just remembered, if they just could elocute, if they could pass the wisdom along. So I think, again, this is a revolution in the consciousness and a revolution in the evolution of the human species. It's important that we take this sacred medicine and we protect it, because the exploitation of this and the pharmaceuticalization is a land grab. It's motivated by greed, not by spirit. And that to me is deeply, deeply offensive. And I like to say that what I want to get paid back in life is the smiles on babies' faces. If you could pay me with smiles on babies' faces, I'd be the richest man in the world. If I can increase the number of smiles on babies' faces, I feel like, okay, I did it. But that's metaphorically, but it's also is deeply true. Okay, I really do. Happiness is contagious. So let's spread happiness. Let's have a happiness pandemic with psilocybin.
Ross, we've talked a lot about the miraculous benefits of psilocybin, or I should say potential, since we're still in research mode, but we haven't talked much about how psilocybin actually works in the brain, especially compared to some more common pharmaceuticals, SSRIs. Can you address that? How much do we know about how psilocybin is actually working in the brain?
So, well, actually, Paul probably knows more than I do about this. So
I would disagree. I think you probably know more than me.
I bet you do. So I'm not a neuroscientist, but I had the privilege of working in the Imperial lab for like 5 years with lots of neuroscientists. So for my conversations with my dear colleagues there, I had many conversations with Chris Timmerman and Leo Rosenman over the years about trying to kind of piece together the neuroscientific findings with what I was seeing as a therapist. So I think the main thing that kind of stayed with me, and it's probably maybe enough detail for the audience here, and if anyone's super interested in the detail, yeah, go. I don't know. I don't have that high level, but I'd say what strikes me is that so psilocybin works on a particular receptor in the brain, and this receptor, I don't think everyone really knows what it does, and it's not all super clear, but there is an association with plasticity and also with sensitivity. So there is this sense of kind of flexibility that the brain can change and transform. And the analogy or the metaphor that's been most helpful for me in trying to understand this plasticity that comes about from psychedelic or psilocybin use is this idea of skiing down a snowy mountain. So you might have heard this metaphor before. It's from Menzel Kalen, who's an ex-colleague of mine. And he says about how if you imagine someone skiing down a snowy mountain, and when they ski down, they make a track in the snow, like a rut in the snow. And if you imagine somebody with depression, for example, skiing down over and over and over again, that rut gets deeper and deeper, and it becomes a very rigid pattern of thinking. So restricted patterns of thinking, very habitual, often very negative ruminations about the self. And it's hard to kind of ski anywhere else because they get trapped in those neural pathways. And then psilocybin comes along like a kind of snowplow, and it knocks those kind of that deep groove out of the way. And afterwards, there's this period of time where it's like, you can ski there, you can ski there, you can kind of ski anywhere you want to go. There's this beautiful, smooth, like snowy vista of opportunity. And it's a window of opportunity to go somewhere else. But in terms of your thinking, to think in a different way, see things from a different perspective, develop different beliefs. But the important thing to remember is the framing that if psychedelics work on this particular receptor, which is all about plasticity, it's an opportunity for healing. It's not inherently healing in itself. It's an opportunity for healing. And the framework in which you give psychedelics is so key, because if it's all about plasticity, it's all about kind of, it's a context dependent shift. So if you have this kind of ski experience of the snowplow, and you have more flexibility, where you go will depend on your values and will depend on the therapeutic support that you're given as well. So I think that's the kind of the first thing that I've really seen working with participants in these studies, this idea of this window of opportunity for change, but the ruts in the snow come back, that openness and that sense of flexibility. It's a particular window of time, and it's an opportunity to go to a different place. But if you don't have therapy or some kind of integration work, the ruts in the snow come back again and you get stuck in a rut. So the importance of flexibility in the framework, I think, is key. So it's not that psychedelics are working on this particular receptor and causing healing. They're working on this receptor to allow flexibility, and the context in which you take them is what will determine the outcome. Would you agree with that, Paul?
Oh my gosh, that's one of the best analogies I've ever heard. And I would build upon that saying the therapist then is a ski instructor.
Yes.
Right. And that's what you need. You need a ski instructor. Don't go over that slope. It's too dangerous for you. Let's go this way. Isn't it beautiful? Follow me. I've been down this many, many times. Yes. So will you please pass it on to your professor? That's one of the best analogies, but I want to contribute that the therapist or the ski instructor going down that slope. And that's really what happened to me. I still have a stuttering habit. It just very occasionally comes out. I don't know if I've stuttered during this interview. I've rearranged a few sentences in midstream, but if you saw the King's speech, that's how deep my stuttering was. In fact, it was worse. S's, T's, C's, K's. It was just so, and anyone out there, please don't make a fun of a stutterer. You're being a bully. You're being an asshole, frankly. It says a lot more about you than about the stutterer. And I had this profound experience, and it totally changed my mind. And I realized, now, the type of stuttering that many of us have who are stutterers, we don't stutter when we talk to animals, and we don't stutter when we sing, and we don't stutter with thoughts in our own head. It's really a social anxiety phenomenon. And what I learned is just to love myself. I know I'm a good person. I love myself. And I became wedded to the concept well, I don't really care what people think about me. Because what happens with a stutterer, they start going down a slippery slope of stuttering. They get embarrassed. Their social anxiety goes up. They're thinking 3 or 4 sentences downstream, but their mouth cannot catch up. And they're so self-reflective and self-conscious that they end up digging themselves into a rut, a neurological rut. Now that rut is the one that constantly occurs. And so with a massive dose of psilocybin, and even though the movie says it just like that, it came back occasionally. It's like these episodes would come in and then they became more distance in their periodicity. So I think that's a clear example of the analogy that you just gave us, Roz, which is, again, the best analogy I've ever heard, is that I got out of that neurological rut. And I realized that I'm a good person. I make mistakes. Okay, I'll correct them. I'll try to be better. But if you have the principles of goodness and you love yourself, and you know that actually people are there for you. They're not there to be bullies, except on the internet. And the people who hide behind screen names and trolls. I mean, who are these people, right? They don't want to be held accountable for, but they'll throw spears at you behind the veil of anonymity. But that's a social disease that we face right now, is the unaccountability for personal behavior from trolls hiding behind screen names, not trying to be accountable. So all that being said, I for my own personal life, it's been a game changer. I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I'm not saying I'm this massively spiritual person, but I have a guidepost now. I've had a good ski instructor. I know the slopes I like going down, and I like these vistas. So I'm going to relive those experiences that gave me positive feedback, and not go down the path that gave me such anguish and negativity. I think it's again, a fundamental game changer in psychology.
I love the addition of the ski instructor, and actually it brings something else to mind as well, which we haven't talked so much about, which is kind of the more hair-raising, kind of frightening elements of psychedelic experiences. Because for a lot of our participants, it is kind of, we often talk about like the connectedness and the awe and all of those beautiful things, and the self-love that can come. And often that, it seems to me that often does come in the kind of the after effects, but often the acute experience, especially for people with depression and trauma, is really harrowing. And certainly my own psychedelic experiences I've had some real like, talk about skiing like a black run, like really no ski poles, harrowing, kind of some of the most terrifying experiences of my life, really. So I think, I don't know, I just wanted to kind of get that in as well, that maybe people are listening to this and they haven't had the experience, and that, yes, there is all this kind of connectedness and beauty, but you do need a ski instructor, I think, for the whole
Thank you, Roz, for mentioning that. There is what I call the dark side. The dark side can come out. It's important that you recognize it, acknowledge it, and frankly, feel superior to it. You're stronger than the dark side. The dark side is going to be there. It's there for you to deal with and for you to be triumphant over. And so this is not just a cakewalk. It's not all roses and starry nights. It can be absolutely terrifying, but it's just like, I don't know, any epic adventure, river rafting to class 5 rapids. You come out the other side stronger, wiser, more informed about what not to do, what to do. My daughter probably saved my life in a class 5 rapids. And that experience for her has validated her as a person all her life, And so we went to a class 5 rapids. My oar broke. I was with Andy Weil, and our oar broke. We're going to class 5. We're going to be pancaking against a rock. House boulders. And she was in the front of the boat. And they were going past a rock, and she was in the very front of the boat with a bow line. And I said, Ladina, jump, grab a rope and jump. And we were all terrified. It was such a dangerous experience. And I said, please jump. And she jumped from the bow of the boat with a rope in her hand. Just before we went down this massive waterfall, another physician that was with us ran down, and it was an epic sort of like fingertip grab, with the rope in her, and it saved her. And Dr. Andrew Weil, it was the first time that I ever said Andy Weil recommended tequila for my 13-year-old daughter because she was like so hyperactive. But I'm just saying that as an example of an adventure where you're optimistic, tragedy occurs, you rely upon the community. She became empowered. I'm probably here today because she had the courage to leap in faith, into a boiling rapids. And she was sacrificing potentially her life too. But the fact that she did that now has made her a courageous, strong woman that cemented our relationship for the rest of our life. I'm so proud of her.
Oh, how old is she?
How old is she now?
Yeah.
She's born in 1982. Do the math, right? So, yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay. Is she interested in mushrooms? Is she?
You think?
Well, we're almost at time here, and so I know this is kind of an unfair question to ask because it's such a big question, but I would like both of you to answer: can mushrooms save the world? Specifically, with Paul, I'm being a little grandiose,
okay, well,
but
yeah,
if you could, if we haven't talked at all about your work on soil regeneration, and I know that that's hugely important to you. So if you could just talk a little bit more about the relationship between mushrooms and sort of.
Well, my greatest supporters have been my skeptics. So skeptics, this is, pay attention here. The largest biological bank of carbon in the soil is mycelium, dead mycelium. Mycelium is recalcitrant, oftentimes dead. It can be there for hundreds of years. Mushrooms, when they form, produce spores. Spores become nuclei for rain droplets. Mushrooms create their own regional microclimates. The decomposition of matter, it builds the soil carbon bank. When mushrooms break down straw or sawdust, about 20% of that straw or sawdust becomes water. They hydrate habitats in advance of contact. They build up these lenses of water that then brings up the soil, the water tables from underneath. Of course, water benefits all these plants. You have more foliage, you have more decomposition, you have more deposits into the carbon bank. So actually the answer is yes, mushrooms can save the world based on very, very extraordinary science. There's one other epiphany I want to share with you before we close that dawned on me because I'm reading an obscure scientific paper. There's up to 8 miles of mycelium under a single foot. The mycelium is everywhere. Go outside right now, find a log that's been, or a branch that's on the ground for a few months, tip it over, you'll see mycelium everywhere. It's an incredibly tight network. It's the foundation of the food web. And I found an obscure paper that sound waves stimulate mushroom mycelium to grow. And then during one of my experiences, my journeys, I kind of put these thoughts together and I shared it with my partner, Pam, that I had this other epiphany. So many indigenous peoples' practices and thoughts and wisdom are now validated by science. We do know that lightning strikes stimulate mushrooms to form. We know electricity stimulates mushrooms to form. Well, think about drum circles. Think about indigenous peoples coming together to celebrate the birth of a child, a wedding, a crop, a festive, hardening, harvesting of food. You're coming together to share resources. Because there's so much mycelium under every footstep you take, they're like strings on a violin, strings on a piano or a guitar or a bass. They are resonating from the human activity. And so from the celebration of people singing, toning, I think that's why a lot of toning happens when you're journaling, the drumming, it activates the mycelial networks. And by stimulating mycelial networks, they grow throughout the ecosystem. They gather more food to benefit not only animals and people, but plants. So there's a re-enlivening of the ecosystem that's being replenished with nutrients that produces more fruit, more nuts, more food. Mycelium and nature is listening. They're listening to us all the time. Psilocybin creates the bridge of language for us to communicate with nature, and nature's been listening all along. It's time for us to go full circle. Fungi gave birth to animals. We are descendants of fungi. What psilocybin mushrooms now bring us back into the realization of our origins. We're all interconnected in this wonderful planet, and the fungal systems are the mother of us all.
Thank you so much for sharing. Roz, I know that's hard to follow, but what are your hopes for the future in the use of plant medicine and healing?
Oh, I think really hope is around, it's just around access. We really don't have much time to, we really don't have much time to make the changes that we need to make in order to protect the ecosystems that are so precious. And so the time scales that we have, sometimes it's kind of a bit heartbreaking, almost imagining that just the time when these plants and medicines will be accessible to people is kind of just the time when we're past the tipping points of no return. So it's a kind of heartbreaking irony and tragedy there. So I suppose, I just hope that safe access can come in time, and that this interconnectedness that Paul is talking about, the interconnectedness of nature, the interconnectedness that mushrooms teach us, that people can experience that themselves and have that feeling of being part of an interconnected web of life, and waking up to the need to protect it.
I think psilocybin mushrooms are Einstein mushrooms. I think we can create millions of Einsteins with a judicious, proper use of psilocybin mushrooms. We can invent our way out of this mess. And if we don't, we had our chance. Nature will continue. We'll be ejected out of the ecosystem. That's the lesson of evolution. But I think these can stimulate, and then we're seeing it already. Look at the numbers of young people creating companies, for replacing meat, for leather. I mean, it is inspirational to see what's happening across the world. We have to inspire the younger generations to come up with the creativity and the solutions to protect the commons for the future. And I think that one of the best messages I've ever learned from First Nations is the concept of 7 generations. Our ancestors are calling out to us, but so are our descendants. This is our short time in this form, in this existence. It is our time to make positive change for the benefit of the commons. That's why all these companies that are forming, that are economic opportunists who have no history and no heart, and they're just exploiting this niche for money. How dare you? Who are you? You can change. I'm hoping they can. But I think it's important that these people listen to the messages of wisdom that comes from these psilocybin mushrooms. They're profound, and never underestimate them. They'll teach you a lesson. As soon as your ego gets big, bam, they'll slap you back down.
Any final words on this inaugural World Psychedelics Day?
Roz, please, you have the last word.
Oh, I can't really think of any words left apart from, just thank you. It's been lovely talking to Paul. It's, such an honor, because his work is obviously so incredibly inspiring. So it's been really lovely to hear more about it. And I'm going to start eating lion's mane mushrooms from tomorrow.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shelby. Thank you, everyone in the community. Let's be respectful. Let's be courageous. Let's be disciplined. Okay? It's important for us to guide. And we're all in this earth ship together. If we can collectively coordinate for the benefit of the commons, we all share the same ecosystem. So let's share a healthy ecosystem together. Let's build it together.
Beautiful ending. What a wonderful and important conversation. So that wraps up our panel today on the topic of rewilding. Can psychoactive mushrooms heal the environment and our connection to the natural world as a part of World Psychedelics Day? Thank you so much, Paul and Roz, for taking time out of your schedules to join us and have these important conversations. And thanks so much to all the sponsors for World Psychedelics Day and everyone that has contributed to make this happen. Happy World Psychedelics Day. See you all soon.